Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick930, and to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Saving Private Ryan, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to revisit one of gaming's most beloved World War II franchises, Medal of Honor. Medal of Honor is a first-person shooter franchise that lets players participate in military operations during World War II. Due to limitations in hardware during this franchise's peak, most of the missions actually have you sneaking behind enemy lines alone and killing scores of Nazis. But the franchise did eventually shift to a modern era towards the end of its life cycle. But let's bring it way back to 1999 with the franchise's first title, simply titled Medal of Honor. During production of the film Saving Private Ryan, director Steven Spielberg had an idea to educate children on the events of World War II, without having to subject them to the highly graphic violence featured in the film. While watching his son play the N64 titled 007 GoldenEye, Spielberg realized that video games offered the perfect opportunity to educate the younger generation. He held a meeting in 1997 with DreamWorks Interactive to pitch his idea for a World War II shooter game for the PlayStation 1 that would focus on history rather than killing demons in hell. This initially seemed like a huge risk, because not only were first-person shooter games generally based around sci-fi elements, but it was uncommon to develop an exclusive first-person shooter for the console. The game began development soon after the initial pitch meeting, utilizing the same engine used to make Jurassic Park: The Lost World the game. A playable prototype was created to help demonstrate Spielberg's vision, featuring basic first-person gameplay with lots of Nazis to shoot. But he wanted to ensure that the project was authentic and respectful to the subject matter, so he had the production team call up Captain Dale Dye, the same military advisor used on the set of Saving Private Ryan, to ensure the authenticity of the production. Dye's involvement in the project is the reason there are small history lesson cutscenes before each mission, a concept that was borrowed and used in the popular Call of Duty franchise as well. The actual technical developers of the game were forced to jump over a ton of technical hurdles involving the limitations of the original PlayStation console. All the characters were designed with only 200-some polygons, and every mission was set at nighttime due to the hardware's memory limitations. Ahead of the game's release date in 1999, there were two incidents that almost caused the entire project to be scrapped. First, the Columbine tragedy, which forced the development team to reassess their game's violence, and remove a ton of gore elements that can be seen in the initial trailer for the game. Then the president of the actual Medal of Honor Society expressed his distaste, but after being shown the project, turned around and promoted the game. Medal of Honor finally released in November 1999, and while the game itself was critically successful, DreamWorks Interactive were forced to sell to Electronic Arts. The final version of the game took place towards the end of World War II, and let players control Lieutenant James Patterson as he navigated behind enemy lines in an attempt to sabotage Nazi operations on the Western Front. Each mission involved destroying some objective, whether it be anti-aircraft guns, radios, or train cars, and killing a ton of Nazi soldiers with authentic weapons. The gameplay is very straightforward by today's standards, with basic run-and-gun shooting, a health bar, and some impressive AI designs for the time. Enemies reacted realistically to being shot. Being shot in the head caused helmets to fly off, while being shot in the hand sometimes forced enemies to drop their weapons. Most impressive were the built-in grenade animations. Throwing a grenade at an enemy sometimes resulted in them kicking the grenade back, and throwing a grenade at a German Shepherd dog enemy sometimes resulted in them playing fetch and bringing the grenade right back to you. The game also came packaged with a deathmatch multiplayer mode that allowed for split-screen play. The game's sound design and soundtrack were also impressive for the time. Each level featured ambient war sounds, soldiers yelling in German, and realistic weapon sounds. There was also an original classical score composed specifically for the game, and it's probably one of Medal of Honor's most defining features in the early years. The game received high critical acclaim upon release, and proved to the world that shooter games could tackle more adult themes like World War II, something that would go on to define the shooter genre for decades. In 2000, DreamWorks Interactive and publisher EA Games released a sequel to the popular World War II game called Medal of Honor Underground. This game utilized the same basic principles of the first game, only this one featured a female protagonist in the French Resistance. Missions still involved sabotaging Nazi operations, only now there were enemy vehicles like tanks and half-tracks to contend with. There were also a few missions that featured friendly AI. There were some new weapons like the petrol bomb, and more unique locations like Greece and Italy. The game received good reviews overall, but didn't really expand much on the original. Following the success of the PlayStation series, Spielberg reached out to a small PC game developer called 2015. 2015 was an independent group of modders for the original Quake game. They began work in early 2000 on a new PC-exclusive Medal of Honor experience with a storyline once again written by Spielberg. Using a modified Quake engine, 2015 created Medal of Honor Allied Assault, with much larger environments than anything possible in the previous two Medal of Honor games. Missions were larger and more involved, and the game's most memorable level is a complete D-Day sequence that has players storming Omaha Beach and capturing fortified bunkers on the cliffside. This game more accurately captured Steven Spielberg's initial vision for the franchise, and brought his epic Saving Private Ryan opening sequence to life, allowing players the opportunity to experience its intensity. The game featured more weapons, more vehicles, and much better terrain variety, like deep forested areas and less linear level design, something that wasn't possible on the PlayStation. Levels actually took place during the day, with a full skybox, with some levels even featuring rain effects. The same musical composer was brought on board, with some tracks being repurposed from the original two games. The game's multiplayer was made from the ground up, with larger maps and the ability to play online against other players. This would be the foundation in which the Call of Duty multiplayer fanbase would be formed. In fact, 2015 was composed of several of the founding members of Infinity Ward, and production for the first Call of Duty title began shortly after Allied Assault's release. Allied Assault was massively successful upon its January 2002 release, cementing the World War II shooter as a mainstay in the industry. The game received two expansions named Spearhead and Breakthrough, both of which added new multiplayer levels and extra campaign missions to the experience. Following the success of this title, EA Games contracted one of their development studios to create a console version in the same year titled FRONTLINE. Medal of Honor FRONTLINE, despite sharing the same D-Day mission as its predecessor, was an entirely different game. This title would be the first Medal of Honor on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube platform, and was a massive step forward in terms of visuals. After the initial epic D-Day landing though, the gameplay slows down considerably, and returns to the franchise's roots with more deep cover infiltration missions and sabotaging Nazi operations. FRONTLINE also saw a return of the original game's protagonist, James Patterson, to simplify the franchise's core plot. The game received good reviews, but isn't as highly regarded as its PC counterpart. EA Games, still convinced that they could capture the critical success of Allied Assault on the PC, pushed for another entry to the franchise in 2003, with EA Los Angeles leading the development team again. This Medal of Honor would be the first entry in the franchise to depart from the Western Front and offer a glimpse at the Pacific theater of war. Players would participate in the Pearl Harbor attacks and the brutal island-hopping warfare against the Japanese. The game's missions were even more cinematic than previous entries, with more interaction with friendly AI and even larger-scale battles. Rising Sun allowed for most of its campaign to be played in split-screen, in addition to its traditional split-screen deathmatch mode. Rising Sun would also mark the first time the Medal of Honor franchise would offer an online multiplayer experience for the console platform. The game overall received mixed reviews, and marked the first time the series really started to fall from grace. Alongside the big console release, EA also contracted Netherlock to develop a Game Boy Advance title that blended third-person and first-person gameplay called Medal of Honor Infiltrator. With most of the original Allied Assault developers moving on and working at their new offices in Infinity Ward, EA Games tasked EA Los Angeles with creating another PC-exclusive entry to the franchise titled Pacific Assault, which released in 2004. Much like how Allied Assault and FRONTLINE were different games, Pacific Assault and Rising Sun were very different, despite featuring the same opening level. Pacific Assault also begins at Pearl Harbor, but eventually the story evolves into some very different missions. New features include squad orders, health regen when interacting with friendly medics, and the ability to aim down the sights of a weapon. The game received mostly positive reviews, but there's no question that the World War II shooter had become a stale concept, and gamers were quickly growing tired of it. And this is key to not only understanding the reason World War II shooters died out, but also why EA Games is often regarded as the worst company in gaming. EA Games continued to chase the success of Allied Assault and the original Medal of Honor, and at this point, Steven Spielberg had long abandoned the IP. In 2005, EA Los Angeles turned their sights back to the console platform with Medal of Honor European Assault. Euro Assault featured a more open-ended level design, with 4 large levels with discoverable mission objectives. The game also received a few improvements to its UI and a new adrenaline mode that makes the player invincible and have unlimited ammo for a short time. The game received average reviews, forcing EA Games to slow down and take a year off from the franchise. Well, maybe not an entire year off. In 2006, EA Games contracted Team Fusion to develop a portable Medal of Honor game titled Heroes. This game was only made available on the Sony PlayStation Portable platform, and once again was met with average reviews. Back in 2004, some of the original designers of Allied Assault began working on ways to revolutionize the now stale franchise. They came up with an idea to have players parachute into any position on the map that they wanted, instead of the game being a linear point-to-point sprint. Medal of Honor Vanguard released for PlayStation 2 and the Wii, and allowed players to parachute anywhere they wanted onto a campaign level, with green smoke marking the location of useful supplies. Players could also customize a few of their weapons with scopes and attachments. The title received mixed reviews and would be the final Medal of Honor game on the PlayStation 2 platform. But Medal of Honor Airborne was the true sequel to the Medal of Honor franchise that had been in production for over 3 years. The project was being overseen by a historical advisor, much like the original entry to the franchise, and the fans' community forum interaction also had a big impact on the game's overall outcome. After a year-long delay, Medal of Honor Airborne finally released in 2007 and featured impressive visuals and a bunch of new features planned to reinvigorate the franchise. The game's AI were redesigned to allow for more realistic behavior, and gameplay was not nearly as scripted as it was before. But unfortunately, the game wasn't received well. Reviewers complained that the campaign wasn't interesting, but did note that it was the best title since Allied Assault. After a sequel to the portable series Medal of Honor Heroes, the franchise would finally leave its World War II roots behind, and would effectively abandon everything that made this franchise so unique in the first place. Now, it's important to understand that while Medal of Honor Airborne did help to reinvent the franchise to some degree, it still was no match for 2007's Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. The age of World War II shooters had finally come to an end, with Infinity Ward breaking the mold and introducing gamers to an entirely new era of warfare. And no, Call of Duty 4 wasn't the first Modern Warfare title, but it absolutely was the biggest and most successful at the time, and gamers were glad to finally be rid of Nazis, Thompsons, and D-Day. EA Games realized this and decided that the Medal of Honor franchise would need to evolve too if it wanted to remain relevant. EA Los Angeles was renamed Danger Close Games and partnered with the developers behind another major shooter franchise, DICE. The studio began work on a new, more modern take on the classic franchise, originally called Medal of Honor Operation Anaconda, and most of the game's story does focus entirely on the events of that real-world mission. The game was soon renamed just Medal of Honor, as both a way to spark interest in the franchise with newcomers, and out of respect for the survivors of those real-world events. The game's campaign is still to this day one of the more realistic single-player campaigns about modern warfare, and in my opinion is seriously underrated. But unfortunately, the gaming scene in 2010 was nothing like it was back in 1999. Gamers care more about the multiplayer mode than the single player, and the game's multiplayer didn't sit well with gamers. It tried to combine the visual presentation and controls of DICE's Battlefield Bad Company series with the fast-paced mechanics and action of the Call of Duty multiplayer, and gamers quickly grew tired of the short-sighted design. Medal of Honor received average reviews, which apparently was enough to convince EA to plan a sequel. 2013's Medal of Honor Warfighter would unfortunately be the final nail in the coffin for this once great franchise. Unlike the 2010 entry, Warfighter focused on delivering high-octane action sequences and devolved into one of the most forgettable shooter experiences on the PS3 and Xbox 360 platform. The game's story was boring and the gameplay was a sea of bugs and glitches. Warfighter remains the lowest rated entry in the entire franchise, and it performed so poorly that EA announced that Medal of Honor would be placed on hold indefinitely. Danger Close Studios was consolidated into DICE LA, the studio behind late improvements to Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, and Star Wars Battlefront 2. Medal of Honor reinvented the shooter genre. It delivered a more mature subject matter and did away with the monsters and demons that every other game delivered. Spielberg's vision of an educational history experience slowly degraded into a series of annual shooters, trying their best to recapture the awe we had storming the beaches in Allied Assault. Despite numerous attempts to reinvent the franchise with new gameplay designs, new studios, and even entirely new settings, the franchise never managed to find its footing. It became clear that this once king World War II franchise was no match for its own offspring. What's interesting now is that the heads of the multiplayer shooter industry, Battlefield and Call of Duty, both have decided to abandon modern and future warfare and return to a simpler time with MP40s and M1 Garands. And while Call of Duty World War II failed to rekindle the fire of World War II games, it's unclear whether the same will be true for the upcoming Battlefield 5, which aims to once again return to Europe in the early 1940s. The real question, though, is whether we see a return of this once cherished shooter franchise. I hope you guys enjoyed this retrospective look at one of gaming's first World War II franchises. Which Medal of Honor games have you played? Which one was your favorite? Let us know in the comment section, and if you want to see more videos like this in the future, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.